It's hard to say, Foster replied, his gaze flicking to something off-screen. But the galaxy isn't going to let this pass unnoticed. You've just taken a stand, Captain. And when you stand against the powerful, they come at you with everything they've got. Ross clenched her jaw. She had expected something like this. Her victory had been hard-won, and she knew the cost. But it wasn't just her crew that had to face this storm. It was every man, woman, and child on Earth. The galaxy might have dismissed humanity before, but they would never do so again. "We'll be ready," Ross said, her voice firm, unwavering. "Whatever comes next, we'll fight." Foster nodded, his expression grave. "I hope you're right, Captain. Because if they send everything at you, you'll need every ship you can get." The screen blinked off, leaving Ross alone with the weight of what had just been said. Her fingers drummed lightly against the console, her mind racing. The moment the ardent star had left Earth's atmosphere, she had known the stakes were high. But now, it was no longer just about Earth. It was about the galaxy, and humanity's place within it. Mills looked up from his console. "Captain, I'm picking up more signals. It's like we've just lit a fuse, and the whole galaxy's starting to take notice." Ross stood from her chair and walked over to the view screen, her gaze fixated on the stars beyond. It was too quiet, too still. She knew that peace, if it had ever existed, was now a distant memory. "We need to prepare for the worst," she said, her voice low but steady. "The galaxy won't let us go after a single win. This warship, they'll be back with reinforcements, and others will follow. But we will be ready for them." Her crew exchanged uncertain glances, but Ross knew they would follow her. They had already done the impossible once. There was no reason they couldn't do it again. But the question remained, would humanity's strength be enough to face the forces that now began to move against them? Would Earth's warships, in all their power, be able to hold their own in a galaxy that had long since learned to survive by crushing the weak? Ross clenched her fists, staring out into the cold expanse of space. Whatever it took, they would fight. They would show the galaxy that Earth wasn't a helpless target to be obliterated. They would show them the true might of humanity's will. The calm before the storm was over. Now, the real battle would begin. The colossal shadow grew larger with every passing second, its form finally becoming visible in the flickering light of the distant stars. It was unlike anything the crew of the Ardent Star had ever encountered. A massive blackened warship, more than 3 times the size of the Varnock flagship, emerged from the folds of space like a predator stalking its prey. The ship was sleek, angular, and terrifying in its design. There was no mistaking its intent. It was a warship, a ship built for only one purpose: destruction. The Varnock fleet, what was left of it, seemed to shrink in comparison, scattering in panic as the new arrival made its presence known. No one had expected this. Not like this. The crew of the Ardent Star stood frozen for a moment, staring at the new threat on the view screen. "Captain, what the hell is that?" Mills asked, his voice barely a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy with disbelief. Ross didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. She was too focused, her mind racing with possibilities. This was something else entirely. A new player in the galaxy, one who had been hiding in the shadows until now. And they were here to fight. "Readings, Lieutenant?" she asked, her voice tight. "I'm not sure, Captain. The readings are off the charts. It's not like anything we've encountered. No known alien species have ships of this size or power," Mills replied, scanning his console in disbelief. "It's cloaked in some kind of energy field. We can't even get a solid lock on it." Ross's heart pounded in her chest. They were facing something new, something unknown. But that was the nature of space. It was vast, full of unimaginable wonders and dangers. Humanity had never been the dominant species in the galaxy, but that had always been the goal. They were a young race, untested, but that had always been part of their charm. They were resourceful, relentless, driven. But this was different. "Captain, We can't afford to wait. Lieutenant Archer's voice cut through the tension. That ship, whatever it is, it's powering up weapons. They're coming for us. Ross's eyes narrowed, and she gripped the armrest of her chair with white-knuckled force. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for dominance. They had already shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of, but now they were up against an unknown force that might very well be capable of wiping them out in a single strike. Evasive maneuvers, Ross ordered, her voice a cold command. All power to shields. Get us moving now. The Ardent Star responded, its engines roaring to life as the ship veered sharply to the right, narrowly avoiding a massive beam of energy that lanced through the void where the ship had been just moments before. The shockwave from the blast sent the ship rattling, and the crew braced themselves against the sudden jolt. The sheer power of the weapon was staggering. Shields holding at 60%, Mills reported, his voice tense. We're taking hits, Captain. That ship is. It's not like anything we've seen. We need to find its weakness. The unknown warship was fast, faster than anything they had ever encountered. It moved through space with an elegance that belied its size, and every time they tried to reposition, it adapted, cutting off their every move. The crew was being forced into a defensive position, unable to find an opening, unable to even scratch the surface of their new opponent. Ross's mind raced. She needed a plan, a way to survive. Humanity had fought against impossible odds before, but this felt different. The Varnock, though formidable, had been predictable in their tactics, but this ship was something else entirely. Target their engines, Ross barked, forcing the crew to focus. We can't let them get close enough to fire those weapons. Aim for their propulsion. We need to slow them down. The Ardent Star fired back with everything it had, but the enemy ship's shields absorbed the blasts with ease, barely showing any signs of damage. The Varnock ships, still reeling from the chaos, tried to regroup, but they too were targeted by the unknown warship. It was clear that this new threat had come for something, and that something was humanity. The Ardent Star juked and dodged, staying just out of the line of fire for a few precious moments. But every second was an eternity. Ross could feel the weight of their situation settling in. She had always known that humanity's place in the galaxy was tenuous at best, but this was different. There was no fear in the face of their unknown enemy, only confidence, even arrogance. They were not just here to fight. They were here to dominate. Captain, we've got incoming missiles, Archer warned. We can't outrun them. Ross's pulse quickened. She glanced at the view screen. The missiles were closing in fast, streaking toward them like a swarm of angry wasps. The Ardent Star was no longer just trying to survive. It was in a race to escape, to outmaneuver an enemy far stronger than any they had faced before. The crew worked feverishly, firing countermeasures to try to break the lock on their position. But there was no time to celebrate. The missiles were relentless, their speed almost impossible to outrun. Braced for impact, Ross shouted as the ship shuddered, the missiles slamming against the shields. The shockwaves reverberated through the hull. The ship groaned under the strain, the shields flickering dangerously. We've lost primary power to weapons, Mills reported, his voice strained. Shields are down to 40%. We won't last much longer if we don't do something. Ross's mind raced. There had to be something, a weakness, a way to turn the tide. But the new enemy warship seemed invincible. Captain, Mills said, his voice barely audible over the chaos, there's a strange signal coming from the enemy ship. It's not like anything we've seen before. I think it's... Before he could finish, the lights aboard the Ardent Star flickered, and the entire ship trembled with a deep, resonating thrum. Ross's breath caught in her throat. There was something in the signal. Something human. It's a signal from Earth, Mills asked, his voice incredulous. Ross's eyes widened in disbelief. She was no longer just fighting for survival. She was fighting for Earth itself. and the truth of that realization hit harder than anything the unknown enemy could throw at them. Suddenly, the unknown warship froze in place, its weapons powering down. The silence in the air was deafening. And then a voice that was unmistakably human, crackled through the comms. "This is Earth Command. You are under our protection. Stand down or face the consequences." The crew of the Ardent Star was stunned. The enemy had not expected this, but the unknown warship, it seemed to have anticipated something even more incredible. Ross stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She was no longer alone in this fight. Humanity had just entered the galaxy's stage, no longer as the underdog, but as a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy would never be the same. The silence that followed the human command crackling across the comms seemed endless, stretching the tension to unbearable lengths. The enemy warship remained motionless, its massive form looming in the void. The crew of the Ardent Star held their breath, unsure whether this would be the moment their lives were snuffed out or the beginning of a new chapter in the galaxy's history. Ross could feel the weight of her crew's eyes on her, waiting for the next move, for some sign that they weren't doomed to be a mere footnote in an interstellar conflict. "Captain, the enemy ship, it's responding," Mills whispered, his voice laced with disbelief. His fingers danced across the console, trying to decipher the strange readings on his screen. Ross's breath hitched. She had expected some kind of retaliation, a rejection of Earth's sudden appearance on the galactic stage. But what she didn't expect was the eerie calm that settled over the battlefield, as if the entire galaxy itself had stopped in shock. What could have made this warship, this formidable alien force, hesitate? The alien warship's engines thrummed, vibrating through the ship's hull, sending a ripple of unease through the Ardent Star. The massive vessel turned slowly in space, its sleek silhouette cutting through the stars, as though it were a living creature deciding its next move. A voice, deep and commanding, came through the comms again, sending a chill down Ross's spine. "Earth Command, you dare issue threats?" The voice was alien, its tone cold, but there was something else beneath it, a hint of curiosity. The alien's words, though incomprehensible at first, gradually started to form a coherent understanding in Ross's mind. "You think you are safe under the protection of the old world. Tell me, how many have you sent to die for this illusion of protection?" "Shields down to 30%, Mills shouted, his hands frantically working the controls. "We've got to fall back, Captain." Ross gritted her teeth, the strain of command weighing heavy on her shoulders. They couldn't fall back. "Not yet. Not yet," she said firmly. "We push forward. We're not running. Not when we're this close." Her words were like fire, igniting the crew's resolve. They were with her, every one of them, fighting for the same cause. Their mission was clear, and they couldn't afford to lose now, not when victory was so close. The Ardent Star's engines screamed as the ship made a sharp turn, cutting across the battlefield and putting them in a direct line with the Varnock flagship's flank. The enemy ships tried to adjust their positions, but the Ardent Star was faster, more agile. It was the strength of humanity, unpredictable, relentless, and driven by something that the Varnocks couldn't understand. It was the drive to protect, to fight for survival, and to prove that humanity would not be crushed. "Target their engines," Ross ordered, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We need to cripple their mobility." The crew moved as one, their fingers dancing across controls, guiding their ship toward the target. The Ardent Star fired another volley of weapons, and this time it struck true. The flagship's engines erupted in a flash of light, sending shockwaves through space as the Varnock ship lost its power. The massive vessel lurched to a halt, unable to continue its pursuit. It was the moment Ross had been waiting for. "Direct hit," Archer cried, his voice filled with relief. "Their engines are gone." The battlefield fell into a temporary silence, the stillness almost deafening. The Varnock fleet was no longer in control. They were vulnerable. The ardent star had struck at the heart of their power, and now it was time to finish what they had started. "Now, we finish it," Ross muttered to herself, her heart pounding in her chest. She was certain the Varnock flagship wasn't done yet, but now it was damaged. Now it was human territory, and they had the upper hand. The remaining Varnock ships quickly realized they were outmatched. Their once dominant fleet was now in disarray, with the loss of their command ship creating chaos within their ranks. Ships began breaking formation, and a few of them started retreating, their engines powering up in an attempt to flee the chaos. But it was too late. The ardent star moved in for the kill, its weapons still firing as it swept through the battlefield, picking off enemy ships one by one. There was no mercy here, only the cold logic of survival. The Varnocks had shown no mercy to humanity. Why should they be shown any now? In the cockpit, Ross's hands were steady, her mind focused entirely on the battle. Her thoughts were a blur, her instincts guiding her every move. It wasn't about personal glory, it was about saving humanity. It was about proving to the galaxy that Earth would not be taken lightly. "We're cleaning up now, Captain," Mills said with a satisfied nod as enemy ships continued to explode into debris. The ardent star had delivered the final blow. But then Ross felt it. That small, undeniable shift in the air. Something was off. The ardent star had secured the upper hand, but there was something in the distance, the sense of being watched. The feeling that there was something far worse approaching. She could feel the intensity grow in the pit of her stomach, the battle still not over. "Captain," Archer's voice was tinged with disbelief. "There's more. We've got something else coming." Ross turned sharply to the screen. Far in the distance, a new ship was emerging from the depths of space. The silhouette was enormous, and it was headed straight toward them. "Brace yourselves," Ross whispered, her voice filled with a cold certainty. "This isn't over yet. It's far from over." The calm before the storm had ended. The real battle was about to begin. The voice cut through the bridge like a blade. Every crew member was silent, frozen in place. The arrogance in that message, the sheer contempt for humanity, was almost too much to bear. Ross's mind raced. They had underestimated the Varnocks, thought they were just another species looking for resources. But now, it was clear they had more in mind than that. They wanted control. They wanted Earth. "No," Ross whispered under her breath. "We won't surrender. We won't be intimidated," Archer said, his voice low but firm. "We stand our ground." Ross nodded, her hand gripping the edge of the console. The Varnocks had no idea what they were dealing with. They thought humanity was weak. They thought Earth was just another target. But they were wrong. The ardent star wasn't just a ship. It was a message that humanity would not be bullied, would not be cowered into submission. "We launch in 15 minutes, Ross said, her voice carrying the weight of the decision. She turned to the crew, her gaze sweeping over them. "We will face them, head on, and we will show them what humanity is capable of." The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed her words. This was no longer just a mission. It was a fight for survival, for humanity's future. And the Varnocks had just made a grave mistake. The ardent star slowly powered up, its engines humming to life, casting a soft glow in the dark expanse of space. Ross's hand hovered over the controls, her fingers trembling slightly. But she pushed the fear aside. They were ready. The countdown was nearing its end, and the final decision had been made. There would be no turning back. As the ship drifted into the vast unknown, Ross could feel the weight of what was coming. The Varnocks were ruthless. They were known for their power, their cruelty. But the ardent star was a different kind of ship, and humanity was a different kind of species. The first battle was about to begin. The ardent star cut through space, its engines thrumming with a power that vibrated through the entire ship. Outside, the stars looked like distant, twinkling diamonds against the backdrop of inky blackness. It was beautiful, silent, peaceful. But for those aboard, there was nothing serene about the moment. Tension hung in the air like a thick fog, pressing down on everyone. They were headed straight into the unknown, and no one knew exactly what would happen when they met the Varnak fleet. Captain Lucille Ross stood at the helm, her eyes fixed on the vastness before them. The ship's sensors were scanning constantly, looking for any sign of the enemy, but nothing came. The silence was eerie. Not a single blip on the radar. Not a single movement that suggested they were being followed. "Lieutenant Archer," Ross called, her voice steady but sharp. "Status update." Archer was seated at his console, his face lit by the faint glow of the screens in front of him. "Nothing, Captain. No signs of any ships. Nothing at all." He paused, his fingers hovering over the control panel as if waiting for something to break the silence. "It's too quiet." Ross nodded slowly. The Varnaks wouldn't let them get this far without a fight. If anything, the calm was more dangerous than the chaos of battle. It made her uneasy, and she could tell the rest of the crew felt the same. Anxiety was seeping through the air, even though no one spoke it aloud. The unknown was always the most terrifying part of war. The ardent star was humanity's pride, a symbol of Earth's growing strength in the galaxy, but it was still just one ship in an empty, hostile universe. "Captain," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Lieutenant Mills, the communications officer, speaking from his station. He sounded unusually calm, but there was a tremor in his voice. "I'm picking up a signal. It's faint, but it's definitely coming from the direction we're heading. I can't confirm what it is yet. I'm trying to enhance it." "Enhance it, Mills," Ross ordered. Her pulse quickened. The tension in the air thickened, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the moment they had been dreading was finally arriving. There was a brief silence as Mills worked. He tapped furiously on his console, muttering to himself. The crew could feel the suspense building, like a drumbeat quickening with each passing second. Then, just as it seemed they might break under the pressure, Mills spoke again. "It's them, Captain. The Varnaks. They're sending us a transmission." Ross's stomach twisted. She straightened, her mind snapping into focus. This was it. This was the moment they had been preparing for. The message came through, crackling with static, but it was clear enough to understand. "We are the Varnak Empire. You are nothing but a speck in the universe. Surrender now, and we will grant you mercy. Resist, and you will know our wrath." Ross felt a pang of uncertainty strike her, but she pushed it aside. There was no time for hesitation. The crew was already in motion, preparing for the next phase of the battle. The enemy's flagship wasn't just a ship. It was a symbol of the Varnak's arrogance and their confidence in their power. But that didn't matter now. Humanity had something they didn't: the will to fight, no matter the odds. "We're going after it," Ross said, her voice firm with resolve. "Full speed ahead. Target their weapons first. If we can disable their flagship, we can break their command structure." The crew responded instantly, no hesitation in their movements. The ardent star surged forward, its engines roaring to life as it tore through space toward the Varnak flagship. Every man and woman aboard the ship knew the risks. They knew that this might be their only chance to turn the tide of the battle. If they failed, the Varnak Empire would have a clear path to Earth. But Ross wasn't going to let that happen. Not today. Not while she still had breath in her body. The flagship loomed closer, and with each passing second, the tension mounted. The Varnak ships fired, and the ardent star dodged, its shields flaring as it absorbed the barrage. Every movement was calculated, every shot precise. Ross's mind was a blur of strategy and instinct. She couldn't afford to make a single mistake. "We're in range," Archer called out, his voice full of anticipation. "Weapons ready, Captain." Ross's heart beat faster, but her face remained calm. "Fire." The ardent star's cannons roared to life, releasing a powerful barrage of energy blasts. The shots flew forward, striking the Varnak flagship with incredible force. The ship shuddered under the impact, but it didn't falter. It returned fire, its weapons lighting up with a menacing glow. The battle was far from over, but humanity had made its move. The first strike had been theirs. But now, the true test began. As the Ardent Star engaged the Varnock flagship in a deadly game of cat and mouse, Captain Ross knew one thing for certain. The galaxy would never forget this day. And neither would the Varnocks. The Ardent Star surged forward with relentless speed, dodging enemy fire as it maneuvered expertly around the massive Varnock flagship. The battle had escalated into a chaotic symphony of weapons fire, explosions, and the faint hum of shields absorbing blasts. Despite the calm, calculated precision of Captain Ross, the tension in the air was thick. Every moment counted, and the crew of the Ardent Star knew this fight could decide the fate of not just their ship, but the entire galaxy. "Captain, we've got incoming," Lieutenant Mills reported, his voice tight with urgency. "Another wave of Varnock ships. They're surrounding us." Ross's gaze never wavered from the view on the screen. The sheer scale of the enemy fleet was staggering. Even with the damage they'd inflicted, the Varnocks were not backing down. They had been a war-hardened empire for centuries, and it was clear they weren't used to being challenged, especially not by a human crew in a single warship. But now, humanity was standing its ground, fighting against overwhelming odds. "Keep the course steady," Ross said, her voice steady, cutting through the tension like a knife. "We can't afford to get surrounded. Launch countermeasures. Get those missiles ready. We need to break their formation." The Ardent Star shook as a barrage of enemy fire slammed against its shields, the force reverberating through the ship like a physical blow. Ross held her breath for a second, waiting for the shields to flicker. The ship groaned but held strong. This was what they had trained for, the moment where survival depended on their ability to think faster than the enemy. "Missiles away," shouted Lieutenant Archer, his eyes locked on his console. A series of bright streaks launched from the Ardent Star, cutting through the void and heading straight for the Varnock fleet. The explosions were satisfying, but Ross knew they couldn't rely solely on missiles. The Varnock ships were resilient, and they would adapt quickly. The flagship loomed ever closer, its massive weapons tracking their every move. The Ardent Star danced through space, its engines roaring as it narrowly avoided more devastating shots. It wasn't enough just to avoid damage. They needed to deal a crippling blow to the Varnock leadership. The flagship was the key. If they could disable it, the rest of the Varnock fleet would lose its cohesion. Without their command ship, their forces would be left without direction, and they would collapse. But the Varnocks weren't going down without a fight. The flagship's weaponry erupted in a dazzling display of energy, beams slicing through the blackness toward the Ardent Star. The crew held their breath as the ship rocked violently from a direct hit. The space around the Ardent Star seemed to distort as the battle erupted in full force. The once serene expanse of space was now alive with the fiery streaks of weapons fire and the deafening roar of war. Captain Ross stood firm at the helm, her grip steady on the console, eyes fixed on the battlefield unfolding before her. The enemy fleet, far larger and more intimidating than anything humanity had faced before, was still reeling from the first blow. Their hesitation was clear, their confidence shaken. But Ross knew better than to think they had already won. This was only the beginning. "Direct hit, Captain," Lieutenant Archer called out, his voice rising with excitement. "The lead Varnock ship is down, but they're retaliating hard now." Ross nodded, her mind already working. The Ardent Star had proven its strength, but it wasn't invincible. They had to push harder, strike faster, and make every shot count. The Varnock fleet was massive, and even though they had the advantage of surprise, they were outnumbered. It was going to be a battle of strategy, not just firepower. "Engage evasive maneuvers," she commanded, her voice cool and precise. "I want those ships moving. Get us into a position where we can hit them harder." The crew sprang into action, their hands moving swiftly over their stations. The ship lurched as the helm followed Ross's orders, spinning and darting between bursts of enemy fire. The ardent star's shields flared brightly, absorbing a blast from a Varnock destroyer, as they darted to the side, narrowly missing another round of fire. For a moment, it felt as though they were dancing with death, the ship narrowly avoiding destruction with each move. "Shields holding, Captain," Lieutenant Mills reported, his voice a little strained but firm. "But they're pushing us. The Varnocks are regrouping. They're not backing down." Ross exhaled slowly, her eyes scanning the scene unfolding on the screen. A few of the Varnock ships were still smoking from their initial hits, but the bulk of their fleet was closing in, their weapons ready. There were no signs of retreat, no fear in their approach. The Varnocks didn't know how to fear. They had always been the ones who dominated, who struck first and left no survivors. But humanity, led by the Ardent Star and its brave crew, was something new, something they had never encountered before. "Fire at will," Ross ordered. "Target their secondary ships. We need to cripple their numbers before they can regroup." The crew worked quickly, launching missiles and firing energy blasts with deadly precision. The Ardent Star fired again, a brilliant streak of light flashing out into space. This time, one of the Varnock cruisers didn't evade. It exploded in a stunning burst of light, sending debris scattering like fireworks in the vacuum of space. For a moment, the battlefield was a blur of flashing colors, energy bursts, and the echo of destruction. But Ross wasn't satisfied. They weren't fighting for victory. They were fighting for survival. Every Varnock ship destroyed meant fewer enemies, but it also meant more were closing in on them. The pressure was mounting. The weight of command was heavy, but Ross carried it with grace. She couldn't afford to let the crew falter now. They had one shot at turning the tide, and she was going to make sure they took it. "Captain, I'm detecting a new signal," Mills said suddenly, his voice tight with concern. "It's different. This isn't standard Varnock communication." Ross turned sharply to face him. "What do you mean, different?" "I'm not sure yet," Mills replied, his fingers moving rapidly over his console. "It's encrypted, but it's definitely coming from the enemy fleet. They're sending something bigger." "Prepare for anything," Ross ordered, her voice steely. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet. Stay sharp." As if on cue, a massive shadow appeared on the outer edges of the battlefield. It was unlike anything the Ardent Star had encountered before. The Varnock fleet, which had already seemed intimidating in its sheer size, suddenly appeared even more menacing as one of their ships emerged from behind a cloud of debris. It was enormous, dwarfing anything the Ardent Star had seen. "Is that?" Archer began, his voice cracking slightly, but he didn't need to finish the sentence. The ship on the screen was massive, its sleek, jagged form dark and ominous. It was unlike anything the crew had ever imagined. It was clear the Varnock Empire had more up their sleeve than they had initially revealed. "That's their flagship," Mills said, his voice tight with disbelief. "That ship can't be real. It's beyond anything we've ever studied." The words rang out, cold and calculating. The arrogance was palpable, even over the comms. Humanity was nothing to them. But it wasn't just the words that made Ross's blood run cold. It was the tone, the confidence that dripped from each syllable. The Varnocks truly believed they could crush Earth with ease. They were wrong. "Do they think we'll just give up?" Archer muttered under his breath. His voice was tinged with disbelief. "They don't know who they're dealing with." Ross felt the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a transmission. This was a declaration of war. The Varnocks had made their move. There would be no negotiations, no peace. The stakes were set, and humanity's future was now in their hands. "We won't surrender," Ross said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Prepare for battle. All hands to stations." The crew snapped into action. The quiet, unsettling calm that had previously filled the ship was gone, replaced by a whirlwind of motion. Officers rushed to their posts, their eyes sharp with determination. The time for fear was over. The Varnax wanted a war. They would get one. "Helm, adjust course," Ross ordered. "Head directly into their fleet. We're not running. We're not hiding." The ship began to move, slowly at first, then picking up speed as it surged forward. The massive warship Ardent Star seemed to stretch out, its sleek form cutting through the darkness with newfound purpose. They were on a collision course with the enemy. The Varnak fleet was close, but they still hadn't made contact. Were they waiting? Watching? Ross wasn't sure, but she could feel their presence, lurking out there in the dark, like predators circling their prey. "Captain, I've got a visual," Mills said, his voice tight. "Incoming fleet. It's huge, larger than anything we've ever seen. They're not making any moves yet, but they're out there." Ross's eyes narrowed as she looked at the display. The Varnak fleet appeared on the screen in all its terrifying grandeur. Massive ships, armed to the teeth, their black and silver exteriors gleaming like jagged blades in the dark. Their sheer size was overwhelming. For a moment, the crew's collective breath caught. The Varnaks were not just powerful, they were monstrous. It was hard to believe Earth had a chance against them. But Ross couldn't let fear take over. "Stay focused," she said. "We have the advantage of surprise. They don't know what we can do yet." As the two fleets drew closer, the tension reached its peak. The air felt thick, and every heartbeat was like the ticking of a countdown clock. Time seemed to slow down, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The Varnak ships loomed larger and larger on the screens, their weapons bristling and ready for the inevitable first strike. "Captain, they're charging their weapons," Archer shouted. "Brace for impact." Before anyone could react, the first blast ripped through space, tearing the quiet night apart. It was a flash of brilliant light, and the sound, a deep, throbbing pulse that rattled the Ardent Star to its very core, echoed through the ship. The Varnak fleet had made its move, but the Ardent Star was ready. The ship's shields flared up in response, the energy barrier glowing brightly as the alien fire slammed into it. There was a moment of deafening silence as the ship absorbed the blast. The hull groaned, but the shields held strong. The Varnaks had underestimated humanity's defenses. Ross's voice was steady as she gave her orders. "Return fire. Target their lid ship." The crew worked quickly, their motions smooth and practiced. The Ardent Star's weapons powered up, sending a volley of counterfire toward the enemy. The first shots were off target, but the second wave hit their mark. One of the Varnak ships exploded in a brilliant flash, sending debris scattering across space. The Varnak fleet reeled, their confidence faltering. For a moment, it seemed like they might retreat, but then their fire intensified. The battle was on. Ross's heart pounded in her chest, but her mind was clear. She had no doubt now. The Varnaks had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity, and they were about to learn the cost of that mistake. The Ardent Star was ready for whatever came next. Humanity's first encounter with the Varnaks was going to be a fight to remember. The day had started like any other on Earth. The sun rose, casting golden rays across the city streets, and the hum of daily life filled the air. Yet, in the quiet corners of the world, something far different was unfolding. Humanity had been preparing for months. The warship Ardent Star, the pinnacle of Earth's military might, was finally ready for its maiden voyage. In a nondescript hangar, hidden beneath layers of security and secrecy, the massive ship stood in silence. Its sleek black hull gleamed in the artificial lights, and its engines, capable of breaking the very fabric of space, pulsed with quiet energy. But no one knew what lay ahead. No one could predict what the aliens might do when they encountered this new, mysterious threat from Earth. The Varnaks, an alien species known for their ruthless conquests, had been scanning the galaxy for weeks. They had never encountered anything like Earth before. The humans were still young in the grand scheme of the universe, their technology still in its early stages compared to the Varnak Empire. But something about the reports the Varnaks had received about Earth made them uneasy. The humans had advanced quickly, far faster than anyone could have imagined. And the ardent star was only the beginning. Captain Lucille Ross, the commanding officer of the Ardent Star, stood on the bridge, staring out into the endless expanse of space. Her uniform was immaculate, her posture strong. But inside, she was anything but calm. Her mind raced as she watched the final preparations unfold on the monitor. The crew was ready. The ship was ready. But was Earth truly ready for what might come next? She couldn't afford to show fear, not in front of her crew. But the unknown, the looming shadow of what they might face, made her pulse race. "Captain," a voice broke through her thoughts. Lieutenant Archer, her second in command, stood at attention beside her. His face was tense, but there was a confidence in his eyes. "We're ready to launch. The Varnock fleet is still 3 sectors away, but we have an incoming signal. It's strange, encrypted. Can't make sense of it." "Patch it through," Ross ordered, her voice steady despite the sudden chill running down her spine. The communication screen flickered, revealing nothing but static at first. Then, slowly, a shape began to form. It was brief, an image too quick to analyze. But the transmission was clear. An untraceable signal from deep space, far outside Earth's known borders. Ross's gut twisted. "It's them," Archer muttered, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the signal. "They're coming." Ross felt her heart skip a beat. "What do you mean, they're coming?" "They've detected us," Archer replied. "The Varnock Empire. They know we're here." "Impossible," Ross said, shaking her head. "We've been careful. This shouldn't have happened." But deep down, she knew the truth. The Varnocks were not like the other species they had encountered. They were smart, calculating, and relentless. They would not back down easily. And now, they knew Earth had advanced enough to be a threat. She clenched her fists at her sides. She had spent years preparing for this moment. Now that it was here, the stakes were higher than she could have imagined. The countdown clock on the side of the bridge ticked down, each second a reminder of the approaching storm. The crew moved with practiced efficiency, checking systems, ensuring everything was in place. Their faces were grim, but their eyes held a steely resolve. They were ready. But were they truly ready for what was to come? "Captain," said Lieutenant Mills from the communication station, "we're receiving a second transmission. It's not like the first one. It's almost as if they're trying to communicate." Ross walked over to the console. "Put it through," she ordered, her voice sharp. The screen flickered once again, and this time, the transmission revealed a strange, almost alien shape. It wasn't a face, but it was an image that seemed to be designed to provoke fear. Jagged lines, like claws reaching for the stars, and an endless, empty void surrounding it. A voice, distorted and cold, echoed through the speakers. "We are the Varnock Empire. You are nothing more than an insect to us. Your planet is a speck in the vastness of the galaxy. But we offer you a choice. Surrender now, and we may spare you. Resist, and your destruction will be swift and merciless." Ross's eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a grim smile. She knew this was a test, a challenge. The galaxy had no place for weaklings, and every species within it respected only strength. They didn't care about Earth's fledgling power or its heroes, but they would learn soon enough. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive. It was fighting to stake a claim among the stars, to make its mark, and show the universe that they were no longer afraid of the darkness beyond. The alien's voice came again, this time more forceful. "You should have stayed in your corner of the galaxy, Earth. Now you have drawn attention to yourselves. And attention from us is dangerous." Ross gripped the armrest of her chair, her eyes never leaving the enemy ship on the view screen. Her crew was ready. They had done the impossible before, and this was no different. The galaxy had forgotten who Earth was, who humanity was. They had assumed the underdog position for far too long. Now it was time to show them who had been hiding in the shadows all along. "Open a channel," Ross commanded. "It's time," they heard our reply. The crew worked quickly, and within moments, the screen flickered to life, revealing a clear transmission back to the unknown warship. The voice from Earth rang out again, this time with an undeniable power. "This is Earth Command. You have two options: retreat, or prepare to face the consequences of underestimating us." There was a tense silence as the alien ship hovered motionless. Ross's heartbeat thundered in her chest, but she knew they had no choice but to stand their ground. They had come this far. If they retreated now, they would be seen as nothing more than weak prey. No, they were not going to back down. The enemy warship's engines flared to life again, and for a moment, it seemed as though they were preparing to launch an attack. But then, the unexpected happened. The alien ship didn't move closer. It didn't fire. Instead, it began to pull back, retreating at an unexpected speed, as though calculating the risk of continuing the confrontation. "Captain," Mills said, his voice tight with awe, "they're pulling back. They're retreating." Ross watched the display, her mind racing. Had they won? Was it possible that their threat had been enough to make the alien warship rethink its strategy? It seemed almost too good to be true, but Ross knew that this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. Not after everything they had faced. "Stay on alert," Ross ordered, her voice unwavering. "They won't leave us alone for long." This was only the beginning. As the alien warship drifted further away, Ross allowed herself a moment to breathe. Her crew had just survived the impossible. They had stared down the unknown, and for now, they had won. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the start of something much larger. The ardent star had made its mark. Humanity had made its mark. But the galaxy was vast, and it had many more surprises in store. The next battle was just waiting to be fought, and Earth would be ready. The moment the enemy warship retreated, an eerie calm fell over the ardent star. The crew looked around at each other, their eyes wide in disbelief. They had just stared down one of the most powerful forces the galaxy had ever seen and come out victorious. But as the seconds ticked by, it became increasingly clear that this victory wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something far more dangerous. Captain Ross stared at the now empty space where the alien ship had been moments before. She couldn't shake the feeling that their actions had triggered something far larger. The retreat of the warship didn't feel like surrender. It felt more like a temporary step back, a strategic move. The galaxy was unpredictable, and this victory might very well attract the attention of far worse things. "Captain, we've received a transmission," Mills reported, his voice hesitant. Ross turned to him, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. "What's it say?" Mills punched in the coordinates, and a moment later, the familiar face of Admiral Foster appeared on the screen. His face was stern, his eyes shadowed with something that Ross couldn't quite place. "Captain Ross," Foster said, his voice serious, "you've made a powerful statement today, but you've also made a dangerous one. The alien fleet that you've just driven off is only a small part of what's out there. We're getting reports from other sectors. There's movement. Something is coming." Ross's stomach twisted. "How much time do we have?"